Why is meditation so important, in particular for today's world? Is meditation something esoteric, which is only suitable for people who are not involved in the excitements and also worriments of today's world? What can you get out of meditation? What is meditation actually? And how can you find a good meditation technique that suits you? In this talk, I will give my personal answers to these questions and related questions. My name is Bruno Buchberger, and since my young days, I have lived in both worlds. On the one hand, in the modern world of science, technology, and economy, and on the other hand, in the world of silence in meditation. I made my contributions to the modern world of science, technology, and economy as a university professor in computer mathematics, and at the same time as the founder and long-term head of a technology park specializing in software. If you want to know more about my reputation in this area, just Google my name. With the same dedication with which I have been involved in science, technology, and economy, I have practiced meditation for now more than 5 decades. I do hope that with this lecture, I will be able to explain a few essential insights that may be practically helpful for a fulfilled life in today's world. I will first explain my view about what are the innermost mechanisms of today's world. It is the innermost mechanisms of this spiral: science, technology, economy, material welfare, and back to science. Second, I will then identify what I consider the essential problem of today's world. Why does the impressive success of the scientific, technological, economic age not automatically mean greater happiness and fulfillment for all of us? Why can the driving mechanisms of today's world even lead to a crash and burnout for many of us and the global society? Although there are problems in today's world, I would like to motivate you with this talk to contribute with whole devotion and deep insight to the further evolution of the scientific, technological, economic age. At the same time, however, I would like to motivate you to devote yourself with the same dedication to silence in regular meditation, which in my view and experience is the missing building block in today's world. In other words, with this talk, I would like to show you how it is possible to live 100% in the dynamics of today's science, technology, economy world, and at the same time, 100% in silence, in meditation, which together gives what I call 200% of a fulfilled life. Accordingly, my presentation has 2 parts. In the first part, I analyze what I consider the innermost mechanisms of the spiral: science, technology, economy, material welfare, and back. In the second part, I will discuss meditation. I now start with part 1, science, technology, economy, welfare. In our usual state of consciousness, which I call in this talk, waking state of consciousness, we are dealing with reality. So in this state, we and the reality around us is different. We observe the reality around us. We think about it and we act in it. We symbolize this in the next 2 slides. So here's, for example, a part of reality which is an apple tree. And we may see very faintly, maybe at height 4 meters, a couple of apples. We observe this, and then maybe a desire arises to reach the apples and maybe eat the apples. So we start thinking about the problem of how we can achieve this. The problem is we see the apples are at height 4 meters, and we know we may reach maybe until the height of 2.5 meters. So there's a problem, and we start thinking how we could solve this problem. And we may remember that we have a ladder in the basement. So all this happens in our brain by thinking. And then if we hope that the plan with applying a ladder may work, then we act. Observe, think, act. This is the triple step in which we deal with reality over and over again. So once again, observing, thinking, acting, triple step. Now, the current scientific technological time, in principle, is nothing else than this triple step applied again and again. So the principle of this triple step has not changed over time. However, each of the 3 parts of the step is supported 100-fold by what we call devices. And thus, each part of this step is refined 100-fold. How was and is this refinement possible? So we show this in a schematic picture. So again, the 3 arrows, observe, think, act. But each of these arrows is supported by devices. And then observation sometimes is called experimenting, and thinking is called reasoning, deriving. By the support of computers, for example, observing by the support of microscope, etc. And acting, controlling, interacting by, for example, robots. And it is very important to remind ourselves that reality on the left-hand side and the model in our nervous system, in particular in the brain, are different. So the model is a very simplified version of reality, and it focuses on some aspects of reality which are important in the current state for solving a particular problem or fulfilling a particular desire. Now, how was this refinement possible? That today we observe, think, act by the support of numerous devices, very sophisticated devices. And the answer is this was possible by what I call the 4th arrow, which I show here. What do I mean by this 4th arrow? By the 4th arrow, which I will call reflection, self-application, I mean that in one round of the triple step, observe, think, act, we do not only interact with reality, but it may be that the result of one round of observe, think, act will change, improve the methods for observing, thinking, acting. So the results of one round are sometimes not only applied to master reality, but for improving the methods of the observe, think, act step itself, for the next stage of dealing with reality. And this improvement of the methods, this is what we call devices for observing, thinking, acting. So here are a couple of examples of devices for observing: magnifying glass, sextant, microscope, telescope, microphone, Geiger counter. Devices for thinking, early stages, slide rule, abacus. Nowadays, of course, computer with memory, processors, algorithms, software, networks. And devices for actions, action. For example, axis, sewing needle, later shovel, crane, caterpillar, robot, etc. The triple step, observe, think, act, applies, can be applied, can happen to be applied to itself. And this self-application in this talk, I call it reflection, is not an invention of man. This reflection works in all living structures. Also in the transition from inanimate to animate, and we may speculate that it was always immanently at work also in the inanimate world. So, summarizing in a slogan, we could say reflection is the nature of intelligence and also the intelligence of nature. It seems to be the driving force of evolution, of the cosmos, of life, of mankind, of science, technology, economy, welfare. Here we can really observe it in very big detail. So here's an example, thinking example, progress through reflection. How does this happen? So maybe at a certain historical stage, the triple step was like this. It was possible by observation just with our eyes to observe that light is what we call refracted in water, also in certain stones, lucid stones, in glass, if it already existed. Then we may thinking by thinking in the brain, working in the model. How would one have to grind a piece of glass so that the light is refracted in a certain way, in a desired, maybe desired way? And then if we have some ideas about this, we might act with the hands and maybe already a device which might be a grinding stone. And the action would be to grind a piece of glass so that the objects observed when looking through the piece of ground glass, that these objects then appear larger. So this would be the historic moment of inventing the magnifying glass and later the microscope, etc. And then the magnifying glass is here, and then in some next stage, and maybe including a variety of other triple steps, at an advanced later level, the situation of the triple step thinking, observing, thinking, acting, may have been as follows. Observation now, not only with the eyes, but using the eye with a magnifying glass, and later with a microscope. One can observe, one has observed that there exists microscopically, we call it microscopically, small living beings, for example, bacteria. And then we can start thinking about these new observations in our model in the brain. What can such bacteria do in humans? How can we use the effect of good bacteria and prevent the effect of dangerous bacteria? And then we could act with the hands and a whole pyramid of technologies from other preceding triple steps in order to produce drugs, what we call drugs that support the quotation good bacteria and eliminate the quotation bad ones. So at this stage, I suggest you do a couple of thinking experiments for yourself. Use some examples from human history and consider how the result of one round of the triple step observe, think, act improves the methods of the triple step in the next round or in some next round. And for this, take examples far back in history, like the axe, the sewing needle, etc. Take other examples from relatively recent history, like invention of writing and printing, steam engine, etc. And take some examples from very recent history, like the computer, the cell phone, the internet, the gene scissors. Now, with this fundamental idea of reflection, we can also easily understand why this wheel of evolution in the process of science, technology, economy turns faster and faster. This is so because in the next stage of evolution, the methods from the previous stage are used to improve the effects of the scientific, technological, economical actions. So let's assume, for example, that we could measure in some way the effects, all different directions, the effects in production and more insight and more knowledge and more stored knowledge, etc., between 1950 and 1960. And then we could ask ourselves, is this effect basically the same? The amount of these effects, is it basically the same in the next decade? Was it basically the same in the next decade, which is 1960 to 1970? And it is important to understand that the answer is no. Why? Because the effects between 60 and 70 were much stronger than the effects between 50 and 60, because much more powerful methods were used between 60 and 70, more powerful than between 50 and 60, because the methods used between 60 and 70 were supported, improved by the effect of the scientific, technological, economical activity between 50 and 60. In the past, maybe 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but even 500 years ago, one did not notice the methodological progress in one generation. Today, dozens of such passes through the spiral of self-application, reflection, of science, technology, economy, reflection, self-application to improve the methods of science, technology, economy. Dozens of such passes happen within a single generation. And therefore, in our generation, one notices that the passes are getting faster and faster. These passes get faster and faster. More and more happens in the same amount of time. And this wheel of turning through these rounds of observe, think, act. Of course, in a superficial view, this has very beneficial effects on the welfare of people. It's the welfare enhancing effect for the individual and for society. But at the same time, we feel more and more that these effects are also deeply threatening. And many feel driven by the wheel to the point of imminent burnout. They do not feel that they are driving the wheel, but they feel driven. The effects of the application of the science, technology, economy spiral does not only lead to higher welfare for all, but also changes the environment in such a way, our environment in such a way, that we are actually in danger of destroying our own basis of life. We could call it the burnout of the earth. While the scientific, technological, economical methods change drastically, they improve in their efficiency drastically and change drastically. The system man, the biological system man, has not changed in the centuries and decades of this dramatic scientific, technological, economic progress. In fact, the system man cannot change, essentially in a couple of generations even. And it is probably also not really desirable that we try to change our own biological system. So this is really a problem. Science, technology, economy change the environment in such a way so that our not changing human system does not anymore find one's basis of life. And it is clear that a scientific, technological, economical spiral, while making it easier and easier to achieve more and more spectacular material goals, does not answer the question, what are valuable goals? So the question arises, should we stop this wheel? The basic scientific, technological, economical welfare wheel. And for some, it seems obvious that we should stop the wheel for solving this fundamental problem. However, I think this is impossible because the driver of this wheel, what I call the reflection, is not a human invention, but rather the principle of the evolution of nature. One cannot turn off, so to say, the engine of evolution. Also, practically speaking, stopping the wheel is most probably not desirable because the scientific, technological, economic progress in principle, like the entire evolution, is directed to increase happiness. And very practically speaking, most of the people in the world, they are really longing for enjoying the results and fruits of this scientific, technological, economical spiral. And they would not be open to just say stop to the cycle, and they are left out, and a very limited part of the population is enjoying the material fruits of this spiral. So the real problem is how can we have both at the same time? The evolutionary spiral that leads from science to welfare, and at the same time, the avoidance of our own and nature's burnout. With this question, I end the first part of my talk. The first answer to this question is naturally that we try to use all our insights and capabilities and skills which we derive from science, technology, economy, in order not to consume the resources of nature unduly. And this is, of course, the goal and the philosophy and the intention and attempt of what today we call the global environmental movement in all variations, with an emphasis on what we call sustainability. And of course, each of us should try to make a contribution to this important goal of this movement, according to one's own possibilities, insights, knowledge, and skill. However, in addition to this, in my view, a much deeper approach is necessary. Namely, we must restore and keep the empathic, intuitive connectedness of each of us with nature as a whole, so that spontaneously, as an individual and as society, we act in such a way that negative consequences are avoided. Spontaneity and intuition is so important because even if science, technology, the intellectual approach to understanding nature can reach fantastic levels, it is just not possible to plan in advance all the possible details, effects, actions can have. So being spontaneously embedded in the evolution of nature as a whole is an important issue. And this goal of being in spontaneous harmony with nature as a whole is the aspiration of what we call meditation. And this will be the topic of the second part of my talk. So what is, under quotation, the secret? On the one hand side, in the daily action of the individual and the society, in what I call the waking state of consciousness, we can and should make a practical contribution to the nature outside, to the evolution of nature, by as much as possible, perfect, observing, thinking, acting. In parallel, however, one must develop or rediscover the ability to have the direct experience of nature as a whole, as a state without observing, thinking, acting. It is the experience of what I call silence. Is this possible? And what do we experience in the state of silence? And what is the value of this experience? The state of consciousness in which there is no observing, thinking, acting is also called meditative state. And meditation techniques are techniques, mental actions, so to say, that lead to the experience of the meditative state. It is to the experience of silence. In other words, meditation techniques are actions that lead to the experience of not acting, at least for short moments, or as a faint approximation to not acting. And sometimes, of course, this experience can be longer and quite clear. The application of a meditation technique is called meditating or meditation. Graphically, meditation can be illustrated in the symbolism of the first part of my talk by the following sequence of diagrams. What do I mean by this sequence of slides? So, starting from the waking state of consciousness, some little mental action symbolized here by the blue arrow is applied that triggers a process by which the 3 steps of awakening consciousness, observe, think, act, are getting calmer and calmer. Still, there is a separation between reality and model. What is observed, what do we think about, and what do we act on? And model, on the other hand, on the right-hand side. So the 3 yellow arrows of observing, thinking, acting, they get weaker and weaker. And finally, in meditation, sometimes only for a short moment, and sometimes only very faintly, sometimes for a longer period, and very clearly, we get into a state of consciousness where there is no observing, thinking, and acting, and the only arrow, so to say, that remains is the arrow of self-application, of reflection. So reflection reflects on itself. There's nothing anymore to be observed or thought about or acted upon in reality. So reality and model, outside world, inside inner world, collapses to one experience. And this is the experience of what we call silence or the meditative state. At this silent state, meditative state of consciousness, also consciousness is not separated from anything else. In a certain way, it is completely unified with nature as a whole, as we could express it. So we call it silent state, meditative state. But in principle, it's a state that cannot be described because every description is a thought that dissolves in the thoughtless state. Now, what do we get out of this experience of silence? Meditation, in principle, has no purpose. It cannot have a purpose because as soon as one would aim at a certain purpose, the flow, observing, thinking, acting is activated again, and silence dissolves. However, it can be experienced, and this is the experience of many people who meditate, that regular meditation tends to produce numerous, under quotation, positive effects. Again, it is not really appropriate to give a value to the experiences. Values are, again, already in the real world, in the state where there is no real silence. But anyway, it might be of interest to you to just share a few of these experiences people who meditate report. So one is that one becomes gradually and increasingly happy. Current and past stresses are released. One becomes more spontaneous in one's actions. One feels the support of nature in actions. One develops a deep appreciation for others, including all living creatures and pre-stages of life as our siblings on the path of evolution, from the subtle deep to the tangible obvious layers of nature. At the same time, one develops what could be called a thick skin. It is, one can see the positive aspects behind many superficially, perhaps annoying situations, or at least these situations will not really bother us. We become very sensitive to what is good for our body and what may be harmful. The intellect becomes clearer. One also feels a strong urge to contribute something positive to society. In particular, one is increasingly interested and willing to contribute both to the scientific, technological, economic progress and to the realization of a society in harmony with nature. The interest and attention becomes all-embracing. At the same time, one feels the energy to dedicate one's attention to details and to achieve goals. The appreciation for individual diversity increases. Simultaneously, one obtains insight into unity behind diversity. One gains insights into deep connections. One becomes independent of common opinions or superficial traditions. Intuitively, one understands more and more what is the meaning behind all this, etc., etc. Also, I think that meditation is the key to a happy future for humanity. Only when we all will have a clear empathic connection to the evolutionary flow of nature as a whole, the spectacular advances of science, technology, and economy will be possible without consuming nature, but through unfolding nature. And only a deep empathic connection to the evolutionary flow of nature as a whole will enable lasting peace between individuals and groups with very different desires in the outer world. Now, how can one learn to meditate? There are hundreds of different meditation techniques in all cultures, in all centuries, through all the history, and also in modern times. The choice of a meditation technique is a very personal matter. The meditation techniques can be quite different. So these blue arrows, how we start this process by which more and more, for some period of time, while we are meditating, observing, thinking, acting, dissolves more and more, and we finally reach this silent state with no observation, no thought, no action. Now the techniques, the blue arrows, may be very different, but the final experience, when observation, thoughts, actions have dissolved, this meditative experience should be identical with all techniques, and this is also what people who meditate with different techniques report. Instead of focusing on only one specific method, in this talk, I would like to give you some important criteria from my personal experience, criteria that, under quotation again, a good meditation technique should fulfill. And hopefully these criteria will make it easier for you to find a meditation technique that suits you personally. So here are my 10 criteria. First of all, good meditation techniques should be effortless. They should be clear, because if you have to apply some effort in order to get to silence, then this effort will distract you from silence. Good meditation techniques do not need any physical, mental, or moral prerequisites. So it should not be the case that you have to change your life, in your outer life, in a drastic way before you can start meditating. It's just the other way around. Good meditation techniques are such that you immediately start with hopefully experiencing silence, maybe faintly, maybe not so clearly, but the first experience, most important experience, is the experience of silence. And then maybe many other effects may occur. For example, your feeling about moral and your feeling about your body, etc. So good meditation techniques do not need any faith. So you need not believe in anything, not in a particular religion, not in a particular philosophy, in a particular picture of the world, so to say. But you just start meditating and you watch what happens. Good meditation techniques do not need a mediator, in the sense the experience of meditation is a personal one. It's the experience of silence in your consciousness. And it needs no explanation by somebody from outside who adds some explanation to your experience. The experience, your personal experience, is the important thing. Good meditation techniques let nature work and lead to the nature in us. So there are various methods that use external means in order to produce the experience of silence. For example, drugs, or some techniques, they use music and some particular, maybe candles or whatsoever. But good meditation techniques do not need any external devices or help. They use the process which is available in our consciousness naturally. So good meditation techniques, and this is the most important criterion, they should lead to the experience of silence. Silence meaning no observation, no thoughts, no action. The resting state of consciousness, we also could say. And they do not stay in some intermediate level, for example, enjoying to see nice colors or hearing some sounds or whatsoever, or nice feelings or whatsoever. No. The experience we are trying to have is silence. And very importantly, even if the final experience is or could be, should be silence, on the way to silence during meditation, stresses release. Stresses should have a chance to release. And stresses are some attachment thoughts, feelings which we may have about past experiences in the real world, in reality. So this seems like a little contradiction, but it is a very essential criterion of good meditation techniques, that they do not oppress stresses. They do not oppress thoughts that may come. They just let it happen. And then the experience is that in good meditation techniques, stresses dissolve without executing any stress on the nervous system. During meditation, stresses dissolve, can have a chance to dissolve. Good meditation techniques generate positive effects on all levels, so on the physical level, on the mental level, intellectual level, societal level. And actually they show these positive effects not necessarily during the exercise of meditation, but in everyday life. Good meditation techniques need regularity. If somebody recommends meditation techniques where you just have to go maybe for 2 weeks to some particular place, and then you intensively apply meditation, and then afterwards you go back, and for the rest of the year there's nothing. This, of course, it has some value, but good meditation techniques need regularity, because this diving into the silent state must be repeated to become more and more a clear experience that is then as strong as the experience you have when observing, thinking, and acting in reality. And good meditation techniques, I think, should have a long tradition for 2 reasons. One reason is that if a meditation technique has a long tradition, then there is a big chance that this meditation technique has proven its value over a long period of time through many generations. And so hopefully it has good value. And secondly, meditation techniques that were introduced a long time ago, so some of these techniques are 2,000, 3,000 years old. They were introduced by people who at that time still were very close, intuitively close to nature as a whole. So there's a big chance that these techniques also will bring us quickly and in a direct way to the experience of unity with nature as a whole in silence. Now, as I said, the decision for taking one of the many possible meditation techniques as your personal technique is a very personal decision. But maybe you might be interested to know which particular technique I am using. I experimented with many different techniques in my young days, but after some time, I got acquainted with the technique which is called Transcendental Meditation, short TM. And this was in 1973. And since this time, I use this technique. This meditation technique fulfills all the criteria I formulated above, the criteria for a good meditation technique. Therefore, I can recommend it. Maybe the word transcendental in the name of this technique needs some explanation. Now, transcendental does not mean esoteric. Transcendental here has a very simple and accurate meaning, namely that this technique leads to the important experience of silence, the experience that goes over the experience of observing, thinking, acting observing, thinking, acting in meditation should become weaker and weaker until the point where we go over to the state of no observation, no thought, no action. And this going over, in Latin, the verb for going over is transcendere, from trans, over, and the old root scandere, climbing. So going over this point of experience of faint observation, thought, action, going over to the state of silence. So this is the meaning of transcendental in this technique. TM actually is a very old technique. It is described in what we call the Vedic literature, which has the status of a world cultural heritage. And in particular, the technique is described in one of the books, maybe the central book of the Vedic literature, called the Bhagavad Gita. This dates back approximately to 200 or 300 before Christ. I happened to read this book in maybe 1960, when I was just a beginning student at the university. And I had the feeling that in this book, a technique is described for meditation. But since the description in the Bhagavad Gita is quite allegoric, it was hard for me to really understand what it means practically. And only many years later, 1973, I got access to the practical aspect of what is described in the Bhagavad Gita, namely a practical meditation technique. And this is the historical merit of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, to have made this practical meditation technique available for our time. For the connection to the Bhagavad Gita, see his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. If you are practically interested in learning this technique, it is very easy. Just wherever you are, follow this link, which I display here, and you will get the contact address of TM teachers in all countries in the world. So as a synopsis of the two parts of my talk, science, technology on the one hand and meditation on the other hand are the diametrically opposing ways how to understand nature. If you want to live 200%, as I call it under quotation, of course, you should go both ways with equal intensity. And then one will get gradually deeper insights and the best basis for acting in the direction of happiness for all. Or in the formulation from the Vedas, the old Vedas, Dharmo Rakshati Rakshita, in free translation, who supports evolution is supported by evolution. This is the end of my talk. My intention is to make my experiences available for whoever can make any use out of it. My experiences for what I call, under quotation, 200% of life, 100% life in the modern world, which is very much characterized by science, technology, economy, material welfare, and 100% in meditation and the experience of silence. For both directions, I give courses, video courses, talks, and interviews. So if you are interested in this, then just go to my community page, whose address I give at the end of this video. So I wish you joy and success in your life, both directions, being active in the world and experiencing silence in meditation. So my best wishes, best regards, Bruno Buchberger.